I get it. I'm gonna have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And then a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
The Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Welcome back to the show. So I was talking to Johnny during the break that Paul Krugman, bless his heart, posted earlier this year, like literally opens the year with, "Do you share my sense of dread about the year ahead? If not, why not?" And it's the beginning of like a 4-part thread. He's like, at this point, I'm not personally afraid of COVID. I do know vax and booster people who've had breakthrough cases, but both anecdotes and the available data say the cases are usually mild. Okay, fine, right, but that's good. It's a huge leap forward. It points to a huge downturn in deaths, but don't get hopeful yet, according to Paul Krugman. The next one is longer term. I'm terrified of climate change. Well, yeah, but terrified is not the point where you operate at your best. You can't, and honest to God, you can't actually be nonstop terrified. That's a joke. Longer term, I'm terrified of climate change. No, you're aware of it. You're doing what you can. We're all, voting for people who are doing the right thing. We are trying to convince people who are, not aware of the toxicity of the chemicals we're putting into the air and water and the ground, that they should maybe dial it back a touch. And the 97% of climate scientists who believe that human beings are having an effect on climate change believe that we play over 50% of the amount of CO2 that we put into the air, or the human action is responsible for 50% of the rise in temperature. That's what the 97% consensus is. Not that we're 100% responsible for it. Not that one volcano eruption wouldn't actually temper that and chill the environment for a period of time, for about 6 to 10 years. They're aware of all this stuff. Yes, is it something we have to deal with? Absolutely. Are we doing something? Yes. All the major countries of the world, but for China and parts of India, have a strategy to mitigate this stuff over a decade and a half. You're not screaming at an asteroid headed from the sky. It's not the best way to motivate people. As a matter of fact, it is counterintuitive. You are screaming bloody murder at the choir. And they're like, yeah, we know, right. We're working on it. But also the idea that he's longer term, I'm terrified of climate change, is a silly place to live. Concern, yes. Work, yes. But that's like, look, what kills most people? Johnny Million, what's the of Americans in general? What's the number one killer of Americans?
Heart disease?
Yes, heart disease. Heart disease, the number one killer of Americans. Do you help mitigate heart disease by being terrified of it?
No.
No. You change your diet and your exercise to lower your chances of experiencing heart disease for a longer term.
Every 27 years you get a heart transplant.
Right, yes, and you get a giant clawed open chest and they just replace it with a machine.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, it's counterintuitive. You could literally give yourself heart disease by living terrified of climate change. And what if you're the person who comes up with a really good idea that might solve the problem through climate, through carbon reclamation or methane inversion or building giant, geosinks to pull the carbon out of the air, which is what we do by planting.
I'm suspicious of you when you say methane inversion. I'm just saying.
That's on a personal level, I think that you are
how can we turn
probably
that around?
Responsible more for than cattle. Okay, now, which, by the way, I know this is the one from the clumps, but
it is?
This is Yes, it is. I mean, it's the one they used a bunch, but
Yeah.
in that movie. But this is the funniest one. That is the fun. I'm sorry, it just is.
Isn't
Just
that
is
like the
funniest.
Wilhelm scream of fart sounds?
I don't know. Yeah, no, I've only got I downloaded 6 of them a while back, and those were the only ones that were audio quality enough. A lot of them had like artifacting. You know how it is. I'm a bit of
Oh,
a
you can't have
perfectionist.
digital artifacts in your fart samples.
No, you need
Yeah,
that.
no, that's
you know,
strong.
you need,
There's a lot of bottom
yeah,
end.
yeah, exactly. No pun intended.
I can't believe
A
I
lot
didn't
of
even catch
bottom
that
end.
when I said it.
I did. Yeah, you punned yourself into a corner. So longer term, I'm terrified of climate change, but at this point, that fear has been overtaken by a near-term risk of political catastrophe right here in America. That's the second one. So yeah, I'm terrified daily of climate change, which makes me ineffective and a screaming maniac that isn't convincing
Is it
anyways.
Paul
Which is
Krugman
also
doing this?
yes, this is Paul Krugman.
Dude.
Yeah. But at this point, the fear has been overtaken by a near-term risk of political catastrophe right here in America. We've always had an ideological conflict, and these conflicts have often been won by people with bad ideas and sometimes by people with bad motives. But now half of our political spectrum is controlled by a faction that is ruled not by ideology, but by the will to power. We had an attempted coup a year ago. The GOP has now essentially endorsed that attempt and is preparing the ground for a future cancellation of democracy. Wrong. The noisy parts of this increasingly small group are dwindling, and they are unfortunately, and I mean this genuinely, killing off their own electorate in this process. And as much as they attempted a coup, it was the most moronic, ill-fated, dunce coup in the history of Earth. They might as well have, for its long-term effects, they might as well have attacked the Capitol with banana peels. It's absurd. And I've tweeted this many times, but I can't tell you, Johnny Million, how grateful I am that this coup was attempted by the biggest bunch of ham-headed morons to ever try to take over a government. And as ugly and noisy as it was completely useless.
Yeah, I don't really see like the great minds getting together and planning a good coup.
Right. And
they might attack it from another angle, like I don't know, come up with better policy, try to get people to vote for the thing that they believe in.
Right, which a bunch of them are trying to do. They're like, like Liz Cheney and Kitzinger and all these folks trying to like wrench the party back to relative normalcy. That's just.
I tell you what, I'm going to say this again. I lived in DeKalb County for 15 years and voted against Kinzinger every chance I got.
Right.
And he is the last guy I thought that I'd be going, attaboy.
Yeah, right. But at this, that's not surprising. That's, there's, that is the volume of human beings are a little better than we give them credit for. And we get caught up because of social media and other stuff. And because clickbait news articles and print media, especially chasing
crazy is loud.
Eyeballs. Yes, exactly. Crazy is very loud and can make you feel like you're surrounded, but it's sort of the equivalent of someone standing out in front of your house with a megaphone by themselves going, "Come out, we have the place surrounded. You have no escape," Yeah. And the sad part is that, in this analogy, Paul Krugman is in the house with you going, "I believe him," and don't try to go out the windows or the back door because they're probably there. They really are. They're probably there. I mean, they're probably not, but they probably are. You know what? I think they are. Don't even try to don't even look out the windows, because if you don't see anybody there, you might have the false sense of security that there isn't anybody there. And then you'll end up going out the window, and then they'll sneak up on you because they're probably in the bushes, right? This is a part of it. So he says, we had an attempt, and he ends it with this: despair is not a plan. Nobody should give up, but if you aren't extremely worried, you aren't paying attention. Okay, first of all, no. You can't be 80, 95% despair. Literally, the dude says terrified. Like in his second tweet, terrified at this point. But I'm overtaken by the near-term risk. But at that point, that fear has been overtaken. So he's terrified of climate change to the point of near paralysis. But even worse, he's terrified by the redistricting efforts and the voting restriction laws, which, by the way, have done nothing but anger and motivate Democratic voters all across this country. There is not a single district in this country where they will try to create a choke point where Democrats are not going to marshal support and make sure that there's either enough voting booths or enough, strategic outreach, especially in the early voting, to make sure that every Democratic voter in Georgia or Texas or anywhere else will have everything they need to make sure their vote gets counted. Because that's everything they're trying to shut down, you can still operate within the law of those things, and it's not that hard. And the Democratic Party, that is our, we actually have a get out the vote campaign. We actually have a get out the vote strategy. And if they tweak it, it reminds me of speaking of the Carter administration earlier, when the Carter administration instituted new gas rules as far as like emissions rules on cars and mileage rules. The American automakers, especially under Lee Iacocca, who was one of my dad's heroes. He wanted me to read Iacocca's biography. Remember that was a big deal. That was
huge.
Yeah, it was a huge motivating book in the 80s. And he and the heads of Ford and other places were like, this is going to be too expensive. And they spent exorbitant amounts of money trying to lobby Congress to turn those standards back. Instead of putting it into R&D and finding ways to actually get there, they spent all the money, trying to motivate politicians to undo it. And during the Reagan years, they did. Japanese automakers did not. Japanese automakers responded to the American change, which was their biggest market at the time, with, I guess that's the standard now. How do we meet that? How do we exceed it, as a matter of fact? And they did. And, that's when, the Toyota overtook the big three. Directly related to the decision point was, here's a standard of quality. You can fight it or you can exceed it. And they decided to exceed it. And this is, in a similar way, Democrats are looking at 2022 with that mentality. Myself included, everybody in the, in the real Democratic Party isn't going to go, oh, well, they passed a law where you need an ID, and I guess there's no way that people of color are going to be able to get an ID. I guess we're just done, right? No, they're going to make sure that people fill out all the paperwork they have. They're going to help them get an ID in mass.
I guess we're just done.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that we're just going to sort of back down in the face of these laws is absurd. And as a matter of fact, like the big three back in the 80s, the Republican Party is setting these rules without recognizing that there's a whole bunch of poor white people that don't have IDs, that believe they should be living off the grid, that have this fantasy of sovereign citizenship while they live in a trailer believing there's going to be an Ayn Rand future for them somewhere, that do not have their ducks in a row when it comes to voting. And they're going to be hit by these laws worse than Democratic voters because they don't think they have to prepare. They don't think they need it. And the Republicans that, support these, the policies that they have don't ultimately want those people to vote anyways, unless they're all on board for the, whatever agenda they have. And even then, they're not going to go the extra mile. They're just going to assume they're going to be able to vote because they're white and they're living in, a Georgia suburb. Whereas Democrats cannot and will not take any votes for granted. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this with more anti-despair for 2022. I'm all in on radical optimism this year, and I'm not wrong.
No.
I'm planting my flag on Mount Hope this year.
No.
And I'll see you guys on the other side of the break. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Margaret Darga.